Today's topic, we're talking about George Sears Greene and Gettysburg Granite. Like Ben said, I'm Tom Foley. I'm a Westerly, Rhode Island native, and I really dig Gettysburg mysteries and monuments. So put this presentation together. We got three main goals for today. We're going to talk about the defense of Culp's Hill, the monuments on Culp's Hill, and George Sears Greene, kind of the hero of our story. So, part one, the defense of Culp's Hill at the Battle of Gettysburg. Really kind of setting this up here in the spring of 1863, General Robert E. Lee, who's the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, and the Confederate higher-ups, his superiors, know they're in trouble in 1863. They've had a string of victories going through the Civil War here. By 1863, the Union blockade is really starting to take effect. You have Grant poised to take over Vicksburg, and Lee and his superiors know they have to make a move. So the idea is to invade the North and win some kind of, a big victory somewhere north of Washington, D.C. On June 3rd, 63, Lee begins to march his troops north, enters Pennsylvania on June 15th. Their opponents would be the unlucky Army of the Potomac under Major General George Gordon Meade. So we have the blue guys, the good guys in blue and the bad guys in red. Meade's army is 93,000 strong. Lee's army is 70,000 strong or thereabouts at the Battle of Gettysburg. So the two armies meet on a ridge north and west of a crossroads town in south central Pennsylvania called Gettysburg. And as many times before, the first day's battle is another pretty much overwhelming victory for the Army of Northern Virginia. Union troops from two corps withstand the Confederate onslaught for hours, holding the roads north and west of town. But ultimately, the Army of Potomac is routed and retreats through town to the heights south of town. This big one down here with a cemetery on top of it is aptly named Cemetery Hill. So for a moment, it seems like Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia is going to get their victory on northern soil. But just then, when victory seemed within his grasp, the Army of Northern Virginia grinds to a halt. So for reasons argued to this day, the Confederates didn't make a move on Cemetery Hill at the end of July 1st, and they didn't end up making a move on Culp's Hill, which is off there just to the east. And that's going to be our main focus for today, Culp's Hill. So with victory in sight, the sun sets on Gettysburg, and here's Culp's Hill. Overnight, the Union Army is reinforced, joined by the 3rd Corps, 12th Corps, and the 2nd Corps. 12th Corps is comprised of nearly 10,000 men, divided into two divisions. Brigadier General Williams and Brigadier General John Geary are going to spend the night somewhere around Little Round Top on the bottom of our screen. Our topic for tonight, George Sears Greene led a brigade in Geary's division. A brigade is about 1,400 strong. These are all New York men in Greene's brigade. So you have a brigade at 1,400 men. Geary's division is about 4,400 men, and they're in the 12th Corps, right? So these guys, around 6 a.m., the 12th Corps is moved and sent to the Union right on Culp's Hill. So they're moved over there. Brigade commander, like I said, is George Sears Greene. He's 62 years old at the Battle of Gettysburg. He's born in Apponaug, Rhode Island, May 6th, 1801, and he's a distant cousin of General Nathaniel Greene of Revolutionary War fame, who is also a Rhode Islander. George Sears Greene attended West Point and graduated second in his class of 1823. Greene was married in 1828 to his West Point roommate's sister, But by way of tragedy and disease, by 1833, his wife and their 3 children are dead. He was just 32 at the time, and his entire family had been wiped out. In 1838, though, he remarried and has another 5 children. His son, Charles Thurston Greene, is on his staff at Gettysburg, and his youngest son, Francis Vinton Greene, was on campaign with Dad, but he got left behind in Maryland when it looked like there was going to be a battle coming up. He said, "Kids, stay back and do your homework, and we're going to go deal with this." And I'm not making that up either. That's from Francis Vinton Greene's diary. He complains about doing his homework. George Sears Greene spent most of his life as a civil engineer. He constructed railroads and viaducts. In 1861, though, at the start of the war, he's commissioned colonel of the 60th New York Infantry. At that time, he's 60 years old. And that pretty much quickly earned him the moniker Old Man Greene or Pap Greene. You know, everybody's making fun of the old man. But he shows a lot of valor in battle, and he's quickly promoted for his actions at Antietam and eventually given command of his old regiment's brigade. This brigade is comprised of the 60th, 78th, 102nd, 137th, and the 149th New York, all New Yorkers. In July 1863, Greene had just celebrated his 62nd birthday, and he's the oldest Union general at Gettysburg. Greene's brigade arrives on Culp's Hill on the night of the 1st and ties in with the 1st Corps troops at the summit of the hill. So if you can see at the top, it says Culp's Hill and Greene's right next to him. 78th New York is tying in their left flank with the 1st Corps' right. So the rest of the Corps stretches down the hill, down the south slope, all the way down to McAllister's Mill Pond there at the bottom of our screen. Here's Greene's brigade lined up. So when Greene arrives on Culp's Hill, and there's some debate about this. The Culp's Hill itself was fortified with earthworks. A couple of people take credit for first fortifying it. Nowadays, we mostly say it was probably the 1st Corps troops. So Greene arrives on Culp's Hill and sees that the 1st Corps has started to dig in. This picture was taken a couple of days after the battle. This is the east. Picture is facing east from Stevens Knoll on Cemetery Hill. This is another view. This is facing north. This is the Iron Brigade trenches a couple of days after the battle. So at this point, seeing these earthworks, Greene has a conversation with his division commander, Geary. So he says, you know, we should probably dig in, right, and turn this into a real defensive position. Geary doesn't like this idea because he thinks that having men fight from fortifications will make them unfit to fight without them. So, in other words, turn them into cowards, right? Greene is insistent and ultimately receives permission to fortify his line, much to Geary's dismay. This is a great shot of the breastworks that Greene's men were able to create on Culp's Hill. Now, whether or not the 1st Corps is the first to dig in on the hill, there's really no argument that Greene's line was the most formidable set of earthworks on the hill or anywhere else at Gettysburg, for that matter. Remember, Greene is a West Point trained engineer, and he goes at this with the engineer's eye, right? We're grabbing rocks and earth and cordwood and felled trees and basically anything they can get their hands on to build these walls up. You can even see there's a headlog on top, which would allow soldiers to fire underneath it and protect their heads while they're doing it. By the way, this is Matthew Brady and his assistant over on this rock on the right-hand side. That rock is still on Culp's Hill, and you can kind of recreate this photograph if you're a total nerd like me, not to steal a line from Gary Edelman, but yeah, I'm a rock hound too. So, so the rest of the 12th Corps, including Colgrove's brigade, which is way down at the mill pond, are going to construct some kind of earthworks with varying degrees of, varying efforts. And like I said, Greene's line is the most formidable set of fortifications. Case in point is this traverse, which is a perpendicular fortification from the main line. And you set those up just in case the main line is punctured by an attack by the enemy, you have a position to fall back upon. This traverse is also protecting their line of supply and reinforcement and communication, which is Spangler's Lane. You can see kind of sweeping off there to the lower left. This traverse is going to turn out to be a very good move in a couple hours. So, like I said, Greene's men arrive on Culp's Hill about 6 a.m. By about noon, they're done constructing these fortifications, and things are looking pretty good. On day 2, though, we have this huge Confederate attack, and it's a rolling attack. The idea is to go all the way around the Union line, right? Kind of one at a time or so with the 3 Confederate corps. And the idea is that by attacking like that, you'll force Meade to take reinforcements and go plug areas of the line. So this actually works in a couple of different instances. Longstreet begins the assault around 4 p.m. and forces Meade to pull Sykes' 5th Corps from the Baltimore Pike to reinforce the left. A.P. Hill begins his attack, and at the end of that, there's a break in between A.P. Hill and Ewell's Corps, but at the end of A.P. Hill's attack, Meade decides he's going to take the whole 12th Corps from Culp's Hill on the right side of his line and shoot them off to the west to reinforce the center and the left. As soon as he does this, basically, Ewell begins his attack from the northeast, and he's attacking Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. Now, Greene's brigade, and some people say, I don't know, I've heard the rumor that Greene disobeyed the order to move when Meade ordered the entire 12th Corps off of Culp's Hill. One of the legends is that Greene just wouldn't go. But I certainly think there was a conversation had, certainly between, Greene and Geary and Geary with Slocum and or Meade to say, we shouldn't completely abandon the hill. We should probably leave somebody. And as I understand it, Geary thought that he should be the one to stay. And it boiled down to, we won't leave a whole division, we'll just leave a brigade. So we now have a brigade that's trying to defend a line that was just held almost, by almost an entire Union Corps. So these 1,400 men start stretching out down the southern slope of Culp's Hill, just as Johnson's Confederate division begins its attack. It's now 9 p.m. It's a night fight, which is very unusual in the Civil War, and this is a desperate fight up on Culp's Hill in the woods. Greene is outnumbered 4-1 on the night of July 2nd, and to quote historian Dr. Charlie Fennell, at no other time during the battle did the Confederates enjoy such an advantage in numbers as they did in this fight. The problem here is if Greene retreats, if his line breaks, the Confederates under Johnson are going to be given an opportunity to wreak havoc in the rear of the Army of the Potomac and possibly even capture the Baltimore Pike right here, which is the good road that is held by the Union troops. It's the line of supply and communication and reinforcement with Washington. So now there's some debate over whether or not this would have been a huge deal if the Confederates had, broken through Greene's line, but it certainly would not have been very good if they were able to do that. Stuart's Confederate brigade down here on the bottom manages to breach the earthworks, as you see off to the south, and the 137th New York is going to pull back behind our traverse and make a stand there. Now, this is a desperate fight, like I said, in the night in the woods, and all you can see is what is reflected from your muzzle flash. And these troops, see Confederates kind of swarming around them and almost surrounding their position. Now, eventually, Greene's brigade is going to be reinforced by some troops from the 1st and the 11th Corps. You can see the 6th Wisconsin up here, up on the north face of Culp's Hill, coming in to reinforce the traverse. And we'll talk about that. That's Colonel Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin, who will reappear in our story. As the night goes on, eventually the 12th Corps troops that had occupied all of the trenches on Culp's Hill return and realize that there are Rebs in their trenches. The rebels have reversed the works and are now using the east face of the trenches to fire into the Union troops. So they battle on and off all night, skirmishing throughout the night. And at dawn, the Confederate troops get a real good look at the fortress that is Culp's Hill that they are trying to assault. So in a gross oversimplification of day 3 on Culp's Hill, we'll just say that day 3 involves the Confederates trying to press their advantage that they'd gained the night before, and the Union troops are trying to regain their works. Greene up here, right in the center left here, is still hanging on to his line from the night before. Greene has this system set up where once a unit is running out of ammunition, it's just kind of swapped out with a fresh unit that's been taking shelter behind the hill. And in this way, he's able to keep up constant fire with fresh troops, or relatively fresh troops. About 3 a.m., the Union troops are going to launch a counterattack, and that will kick off the heaviest and longest sustained fighting in the entire Battle of Gettysburg. These guys are going to slug it out from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's 7 hours. These guys are going to go at it on Culp's Hill. Just to give you an idea of how intense this fight actually was, the 149th New York had its flagstaff shot in half twice. This is the bronze relief from the 149th's monument on Culp's Hill showing Color Sergeant William Lilly lashing their flagstaff back together. The flag was shot, they counted, I think it was 80 bullet holes in that flag. And I believe the flagstaff itself can be seen at the Onondaga Historical Society in Onondaga, New York. But this bronze panel is really cool because you can see all the you can see the breastworks and how wooded it was up there. And also, as we go on during the day, we have a little bit of serendipity at the Battle of Gettysburg. You can see center left, there's Shaler's brigade making its way north to reinforce Greene's line. Now, in Shaler's brigade is a regiment, the 122nd New York, which is also called the 3rd Onondaga Regiment. So they were raised in Onondaga County, New York, as was the 149th New York of Greene's brigade, which is also called the 4th Onondaga Regiment. So you have the 3rd Regiment raised in Onondaga County and the 4th Regiment raised in Onondaga County. By luck, these two regiments meet up shoulder to shoulder in the trenches along Greene's line. And when they recognized each other, they raised the cheer that, quote, drowned out even the din of battle. So we have friends and neighbors in these two, maybe even relatives in these two different regiments, and they're in two completely different corps, even though they're in the same army, and meeting up on the field of battle. This is the first and only time this would happen in the whole war. So, closing out the battle for Culp's Hill, after about 7 hours of fighting, the Confederates recognized the futility of what they're trying to do, and this attack on the Union center, which would come to be known as Pickett's Charge, never really materializes. They were kind of waiting for it to happen and really press the attack. It doesn't happen. So the Confederates are going to fall back and take up a line west of Rock Creek. So at that point, the fight for Culp's Hill is basically over. The third day closes for the Battle of Gettysburg with the absolute repulse of Pickett's Charge, and we have a sound defeat for Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. So now let's talk about something I love: monuments on the field of Gettysburg. Being a Westerly guy, growing up next to a quarry, I have a real thing for granite monuments. And so I thought we'd take a minute and kind of look at, the process of ordering, selling, and building a monument and what that actually takes. The golden age of memorializing the Gettysburg battlefield was the 1880s through the 1890s, especially after, state governments started to fund the monuments. For instance, in 1886, New York appropriated $1,500, which is about $40,000 in 2020 money, for any New York unit that wanted to erect a monument at Gettysburg. And it also established a commission to oversee the funding called the New York Monuments Commission. So let's take a look at what this process is like. So first you have the Veterans Organization. So these are the members of a particular unit, like say the 149th New York Regiment, Infantry Regiment, right? And they're going to meet up with some representative called an agent from the monument fabricator. And they come up with a design for a monument. So at that point, the plan is submitted to the state's Monument Commission. So in the 149th's case, it would be the New York Monument Commission for their approval. And an appropriate spot for the monument is determined, and the land is surveyed and purchased. This is from the New York State Archives in Albany, New York. And this is a great example of, laying out where exactly the monuments are going to be. And we'd see in red on the top, that's the 78th, 102nd New York. Those are two regiments that combined their resources. Actually, they were consolidated at the end of the war. And even though they could have set up two individual monuments at Gettysburg, they decided to combine the funds and set up a monument dedicated to both units, 78th and 102nd. On the bottom, way on the bottom, you could see the 137th New York. And we're just laying out, where exactly these monuments are going to be. So at that point, the Monuments Commission, like New York Monuments Commission, after approving the design and the placement, submits the order to the monument fabricator. In our case, that would be the Smith Granite Company of Westerly, Rhode Island. And the Smith Granite Company would turn around and copy that design into their order book. So here we have the 140th New York Volunteers Monument. That's the O'Rourke Monument at Gettysburg. Anybody ever shine his nose on Little Round Top? This is the monument. So this is, ordered in December of 87 and dedicated at the 25th anniversary of the battle, July 1888. So if you have a statue on your monument, though, what happens is the statue starts with a sculptor who, creates a clay model. And from that clay model, a plaster model, which is a little hardier, is created. And that plaster model is then turned over to a statue cutter who actually chisels the monument out of a block of granite. All right. The bases, the tiers, flank markers, and all that are left to other Smith Granite Company craftsmen. So at that point, once it's finished up here in Westerly, Rhode Island, it's shipped to Gettysburg by rail. The foundations are laid. The ones that I've really come across, they're put in by Gettysburg companies. A monument is then erected by a setter and a crew. Those are the guys that actually put the thing up. The monument is then dedicated and turned over to the Gettysburg Memorial Association for stewardship, later the Gettysburg National Military Park. But it all starts with the agent, with the salesman. So I thought we would talk about one of the Smith Granite Company's most prolific salesmen. His name is William Bud Van Amringe, and we'll talk about some facts and some fiction. So most of these monuments we're about to see were ordered by Civil War veterans organizations from the Smith Granite Company through this guy, Agent William Bud Van Amringe, like I said. So this guy was so prolific, sold so many monuments, that one article claims he had a hand in 168 monuments at Gettysburg through Smith or otherwise. Van Amringe is born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1850, and he'd spend most of his life as a salesman. In 1883, he moved from Providence to Boston and began working for the Smith Granite office there on 3 Bromfield Street, which is pretty close to the Boston Common. William's uncle John was pretty famous. Columbia University has awarded the John Howard Van Amringe Mathematical Prize every year since his retirement in 1910. John was the first dean of Columbia College and was the first president of the American Mathematical Society. There's a great clip on YouTube of the AMS singing this John Howard Van Amringe song, and one day I'll learn it. Maybe I'll make my music students figure out how to play it. Anyway, so back to William. Right, William Van Amringe. At some point, William purchased the Smith Granite Company office in Boston and started his own business, the Van Amringe Granite Works, which incorporated in 1899. And it promoted itself as also representing the Smith Granite Company. So it's unclear when they became separate entities. This is an advertisement showing the 40th New York Regiment Monument, which is just, I think, west of Little Round Top. And you can see at the bottom, we have Van Amringe Granite Company. So Van Amringe was a particularly adept salesman. As it turns out, he was also an expert on the Battle of Gettysburg. This 1909 article claims that Van Amringe was, quote, more familiar with the famous battlefield than any man in the country. And he was practically Gettysburg royalty by the turn of the century. He was an orator and, honored guest at a lot of monument dedications. So although he's a great salesman and obviously very knowledgeable, there's a lot of general confusion in these old 1880s, 1890s newspapers, and they give him these crazy overstated accolades. Things like made most of the monuments on the Gettysburg battlefield, or designed all of the monuments, or, case in point, built the first monument on the battlefield. And like I said, he's listed on about 80% of the 80 or so monuments Smith made for the Gettysburg battlefield. But I hope you go along with me on a ride, and we'll try and set the record straight here. So Van Amringe sold the monument dedicated to the 1st Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. Now, that's the regiment with the numerical designation 1, as in the number, not the word first. He did not design and sell, as some articles claim, the first monument at Gettysburg, which is a distinction that belongs to the 1st Minnesota Infantry. Nor did he design and sell the first monument dedicated to a Massachusetts unit. That distinction belongs to the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, which also happens to be the 1st regimental marker on the battlefield. Nor did Van Amringe design and sell the 2nd monument to the 1st Massachusetts Infantry. He did sell the Smith Granite Company's 1st monument made for a Massachusetts unit, which is the 1st Mass Battery, but the 1st Mass Infantry monument was the 10th monument that Smith sold to a Massachusetts unit. Either way, Van Amridge was a pivotal character in the story of Smith Granite at Gettysburg, whether or not, some of these accolades were completely accurate. So let's take a look at some monuments. I've been blathering on for a while. Let's do this. 28th Pennsylvania. These guys are in Candy's Brigade, Geary's Division of the 12th Corps. This is dedicated October of 1885. Now, this unit has this distinguished gentleman who was a lieutenant at Gettysburg. His name is Colonel John Page Nicholson, who went on to become the chairman of the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission in 1893, which is a position he held for 29 years until his death in 1922. So the 28th, this is their original monument as it looked in 1885. The ceremony was not actually held at the monument, as it turns out, because the weather was pretty gnarly. This is their order book page for the 28th Pennsylvania and Knapp's Battery, which we'll talk about. This thing up on top here, if you look on the right, this is a forage cap that's placed on the top of the monument. This is a great shot of the 28th Pennsylvania monument on our left. And to our right, we can see what remains of Greene's trenches as it was in 1885 when the monument was dedicated. This is such a cool shot because it really shows us what that field looked like before they put Slocum Ave in. It looks like they actually had to move the monument back somewhat when they put the road in. And actually, this is the CCC putting Slocum Ave in the 1930s. And we can see off to the left here the 28th Pennsylvania Monument, but it looks a little bit different. Well, this is the modern view. The star and the bronze panel were added in 1889. And the regiment liked this design so much that they decided they were going to get another one and place it on the Chattanooga battlefield. Now, the question is, who was the sales agent for all of this granite? And I'll bet you can already guess, William Van Amridge. Our next unit is Knapp's Battery, which is Battery E, Independent Pennsylvania Artillery. This is in the 12th Corps Artillery Brigade. Their monument is dedicated, along with the 28th Pennsylvania, October of 1885. Knapp's Battery has two monuments. One of them's on Culp's Hill proper, and the other is on Powers Hill, which if we go south on the Baltimore Pike, it's off there on the left. Let's see. They had 3 guns up on Culp's Hill proper during the night of July 2nd, and then they're pulled off and placed on Powers Hill when Meade pulled the 12th Corps off to reinforce the left. This is a great picture of Knapp's Battery shortly after the Battle of Antietam in 1862. And these guys have an interesting backstory. In July 1861, Joseph Knapp was the first lieutenant of the 28th Pennsylvania, whose monument is on our left, which was a huge regiment. They were 1,800 men strong, 18 full companies. Usually you have 10 companies, full strength. This is 1,000 men. These guys are almost double that. Knapp received permission to raise an artillery company and use some of the surplus men from the 28th Pennsylvania to fill out its ranks. This unit became Battery E, Independent Pennsylvania Artillery, and was, after it was trained and equipped, attached to John Geary's command, who's on our right. The battery is commanded at the Battle of Gettysburg by Captain Charles A. Atwell. Knapp had resigned after Chancellorsville to go run a foundry. Charles Atwell, died of wounds received at Wauhatchie Junction, Tennessee in the fall of 1863, so just a few months after the Battle of Gettysburg. As would Major General John Geary's son, who commanded a section of guns in the battery. He also died at Wauhatchie, Tennessee. So this is the Knapp's Battery's monument. It was ordered in August 1885 and dedicated with the 28th Pennsylvania and the 147th Pennsylvania on October 13th, 1885. And before you ask, yes, that happens to be just a couple of weeks before Marty went and met Doc in Hill Valley. Knapp's Battery's second monument on Powers Hill is dedicated in 1889. Here's their order book page. All right, we can see the cannon up on the top left. Now on the bottom, we have this interesting little chunk of granite with a bronze panel on the front of it. And that turns out to be an added base that we added in 1889. Right, the bronze panel has gone missing. No one's entirely sure when it went missing or who has it, but it is now gone. But you can see here's, the order book page on the right and the bronze panel right there. So something else has gone missing over the years, and you can tell it's the granite cannonball that's supposed to be on the top of the monument. Don't worry, guys, it's back. It's been replaced a couple of times. Looks a little bit different only because it's not Westerly granite. It's actually Barry granite, Barry, Vermont granite. And there it is again. So the man responsible for erecting a lot of these monuments, and by that I mean physically actually setting these up, was a guy named James Edward Roach. And he's listed in the Westerly Directory as a professional monument setter. Roach is born in Calureton, New York in 1851, dies in Westerly in 1917, lived most of that time on George Street in Westerly, which is right up the street. So he is, you can see on the screen, he set up a whole bunch of monuments in Gettysburg. And just by way of case in point, in August 1890, in 1 month, he set up the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 6th, 11th, 12th, and 13 Pennsylvania Reserve infantry monuments and the monument to Ricketts Battery. So that was one heck of a month. Yes. Roach is kind of a local celebrity in Gettysburg, and he shows up in the newspapers quite a bit. It's, local news in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Mr. Roach is here. They misspell Roach all the time in several different ways. But Mr. Roach is here from the Smith Granite Company setting up another monument, and this is what he's doing. As a matter of fact, he appears in newspapers in 1886, 87, 89, 90, and 92, but doesn't appear in any 1888 newspapers. And that's going to come up later in our story. So no James Roach, the professional monument setter for the Smith Granite Company in 1888. We'll talk about that in a bit. So we know James Roach was in Gettysburg in the spring of 1886, setting up the first Massachusetts Infantry Monument. And here we have a picture of these guys actually bringing the monument out to the field. So as far as I know, none of the men in this photo have been identified, but it could be that we have James Roach somewhere in these photos. On the right-hand side here, I really want it to be this dude with the watch chain because he just looks so cool. I hope that's him. Here he is up front again. So I would love it if one day we could ID these guys, but I don't know exactly how we could do that. Up next, we have the 147th Pennsylvania. These guys are in Candy's Brigade of Geary's Division. Once again, this monument is dedicated in October of 1885. Now, these guys ordered not one, not two, but 3 star monuments from the Smith Granite Company. And who was the sales agent for all of this granite? William Bud Van Amridge. That's right. So here is 97 shot of the 147th's main monument. Here's a picture of the order book page. Right, looks like it was ordered in 88. And here's a modern day view of the 147th Pennsylvania Infantry. They are commanded at Gettysburg by Colonel Ario Pardee, and this monument is very close to Pardee Field. This is the right flank marker of the 147th. And the 3rd star that the regiment ordered is up on Culp's Hill, marking their position on July 1st. So anybody up when you come to the end of Sykes Avenue and you hit the Wheatfield Road, if you look off to your left, you'll see the 147th Monument, Regiment Monument right there. So that brings us to the 123rd New York's monument. These guys are in McDougall's Brigade of Ruger's Division, 12th Corps. Monuments dedicated in September 1888. Now, this is the monument's dedication in 1888. The statue on the top of the monument depicts Clio, who's the Greek muse of history, recording the deeds of the men at the Battle of Gettysburg. We have one other Clio at Gettysburg. It's on the Soldiers' National Monument. This monument itself was created by the Smith Granite Company, but the statues, which are marble, I believe were cut in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. It's the 123rd New York's order book page. And you can see on the left here, we have that beautiful statue. The report of the 123rd New York's Monument Commission, Committee, rather, is one of the most complete and detailed reports I have ever seen. And it really sheds light on the ordering process that these guys were going through in 1888. And the Smith Granite Company actually presented the design of the monument along with a bunch of other agents from the Northeast. So we have, let's see, we have one from Sandy Hill, New York. We have one from Boston, one from Barry, Vermont, and of course, Smith Granite from Westerly. So these were all rejected at first. And then in May of 1888, we have a whole set of new agents coming in and presenting new designs along with Smith Granite again, from Chicago, from Boston, and of course, Smith Granite beat all of these other agents, all of these other organizations out with their beautiful design. The monument costs $2,500, which is $70,000 in 2020 money. And the chairman of the 123rd's Monument Committee visited Westerly twice while the monument was being fabricated to kind of inspect the work that was going on. He came up once to look at the clay model, which is sculpted by J.G. Hamilton, and came up again to inspect the plaster model, which is kind of the final design. The 123rd New York also had a huge, or was involved with this big bureaucratic battle with the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association and the New York Monuments Commission and one of their other veteran organizations from the 20th Connecticut, which is the same brigade as the 123rd New York. And the argument was over where exactly on the field the 123rd's monument was going to be placed. You know, everybody wanted to have their monument right on the front line. And, you know, apparently there was some debate over whether or not, you know, they were actually up front or where exactly they were positioned. I would love to look into that further. So in any event, we have Clio the Muse on the left-hand side. And this is really interesting because this view of the 1895 Labor Day Parade in Westerly, Rhode Island features the Smith Granite float here up at the top of Granite Street Hill. And on the front of the float looks to be the plaster model used for the 123rd New York. So that's really cool. Here's another view of the parade making its way through downtown Westerly in 1895. It's a great photo. And, you know, we couldn't zoom in too far. This is just the photo, not the negative, but that sure looks like that's our Clio there inscribing the deeds of the men at Gettysburg. So for this beautiful statue, the guy that actually cut it out of stone was a man named Joseph Bedford. He's a statue cutter for the Smith Granite Company. He's born in Ireland in Black, 1847, Black 47, dies in Westerly in 1900. It sounds like he arrived in the United States in 1855, but he's in Westerly by 1860. He served in the United States Navy for a 1-year enlistment, 1863 to 64. He was 16 years old, and he served aboard a captured British steamer, which was a blockade runner named Victory. And when it was captured, it was renamed the Queen, which is no doubt a shot at Queen Victoria. It was then converted into a Union Navy supply ship, which operated out of New Orleans. I think that's a really cool story. Anyway, Bedford, we know from the enlistment record, had blue eyes, dark hair. He's about 5'7", and he had a big honking scar on his right forefinger. Probably, maybe from cutting granite. I don't know. Maybe, that's just what I want it to be. Lived most of his life on Grove Avenue up the street in Westerly. Bedford worked for the Smith Granite Company for 24 years, according to his obituary. This is the first statue that he ever cut for Smith Granite in 1881, which is the Wilcox Memorial in New Haven, Connecticut. That's the order book page you're seeing. This is the actual monument present day. And we can see that beautiful statue up there. The last statue he ever cut was the Hungerford Monument in Jamesville, New York, which was erected in 1897. Here's a modern day view of that. So it seems like Bedford maybe had a forte in carving women's statues. Although he was an assistant stonecutter on the American Volunteer Monument, Old Simon, which is towering above the Antietam battlefield. This was produced by Batterson Quarry in Westerly. And none of these guys in the photo are ID'd, so I'm wondering if maybe Bedford is one of these gentlemen in this photo. One of the purposes behind this presentation is maybe to reach out to people that know or are related to some of the guys that I'm talking about. Maybe we can gain a little bit more understanding about who they were and fill in some pieces. So that brings us to the 78th 102nd New York, which is members of Greene's Brigade, Geary's division. Their monument is dedicated at the 25th anniversary of the battle. That's July 2nd, 1888. Here's their order book page, full page on the left, zoom in on the right. It's actually a soldier firing over the breastworks on Greene's line. Here's about a 1903 view of the monument. This is the 1897 view of the monument. I love these old photos because you can zoom in, see this carriage just kind of disappearing around the corner. The other thing to point out here, too, is actually there's a couple of things. One is the original route of Slocum Ave. You can see it snakes its way up the hill there, up Culp's Hill. And anybody who's been over there recently knows Slocum Ave goes to the west of Culp's Hill. The original Slocum Ave went to the east of Culp's Hill. So that's pretty cool. This monument has been damaged several times over the years. This is a big storm in 1896. We can see here, he's missing part of his musket. This is a modern day view. I think last year they did, Park Service did some work on this monument and replaced his hat brim, his kepi brim, and I think a couple of pieces of the actual rifle. You can see if we zoom in here, you could see the cracks in the gun stock that were fixed. All right, this is a reunion of veterans of the 78th 102nd. That's not the actual dedication. These guys are a little too old to be 1888, but you can see the guy on the bottom has his rifle pointed at us, so that's good. Here's a modern day view of that monument. This is one of the most beautiful monuments on the field, I think. So my good friend Jeff Harding, who's a licensed battlefield guide, has been researching the 78th and 102nd regiments, specifically their monument, and he's just finished an article that's going to be coming out in Gettysburg magazine, I think in January. So I'm sure he's going to discuss, among many things, what appears to be a lion carved into the earthworks here on this monument. Jeff is also researching a couple of other things at Gettysburg, specifically the romance between First Corps Commander John Reynolds and his fiancee Kate Hewitt. He's also researching, he's doing an article right now about exactly what the weather was at the Battle of Gettysburg, which is really interesting. So great stuff coming up from Jeff. So here's another shot of that lion. So the question is, if someone carved a lion into this statue, whose idea was it? And was it intentional, number one? And if it was intentional, whose idea was it to put it into the statue? So we know that the sculptor, the guy that actually created this monument out of clay, right, was this guy, Robert D Barr. Barr is born in Scotland in 1857, dies in Westerly in 1900. He grew up in New York City, and he arrives in Westerly about 1885. His dad, Andrew, is a stonemason, so it seems like granite is in the blood for Robert. Frank, his brother, was also a stone cutter. Both of them stayed in New York City, as far as I know. Robert Barr lived at 79 Elm Street in Westerly, which is the intersection of Elm and Beach for you Westerlians watching at home. And Robert Barr is kind of the subject of a little romance at the Smith Granite Company. He actually married Bertha Richmond at the Lorenzo Richmond residence, which is actually in Pawcatuck, Connecticut. Lorenzo Richmond was a stonecutter at the Smith Granite Company. So I think we can, kind of deduce how that relationship started. So that brings us to one of my favorite monuments that is no longer on Culp's Hill, or should I say the only monument I know of that's no longer on Culp's Hill. It's the 149th New York, which, if you remember from earlier, is also called the 4th Onondaga Regiment. These guys are in Greene's Brigade, and the monument itself was erected in June of 1888. And once it was erected at the 25th anniversary of the battle, 1888, it was completely rejected and almost immediately rejected and subsequently torn down and replaced in 1892. George Collins, who is a first lieutenant of Company I at Gettysburg in 1863, who became the chairman of the regiment's monument committee in 1888, said that the monument that was erected for them was smaller than they had specified and not comparable to other monuments in its vicinity, which is why they rejected it and tore it down. Turns out he was right. It's definitely smaller. And when I gave this talk 2 years ago, a couple of on the 149th monument, the audience members pretty quickly identified what exactly was wrong with the monument that the veterans got versus the monument that was in the order book at the Smith Granite Company. And you could see it's missing a piece. All right. It's definitely missing the bottom tier. And as a result, it's 1'9" shy of its intended height. Now, I wish we had had a professional monument setter that was responsible for going down to Gettysburg to set up monuments and make sure everything was done correctly. Oh, wait, we did have a guy. His name is James Roach. But remember, I said that Roach doesn't appear in the newspapers in 1888. So I'm starting to question whether or not he was actually there when the monument was erected. We do know there were a couple of people sent from Westerly down to Gettysburg. Their names are John Brines, Edward Kelleher, and Joseph E. Thompson, J.E. Thompson. Tim Smith at the Adams County Historical Society, also a licensed battlefield guide, was kind enough to trace this rock carving on Culp's Hill for us. It's in Gettysburg Daily, which is a great website. And you can see it says 1888, Westerly, Rhode Island, J.E. Thompson. This happens to be right at the foot of the 149th New York, right at the foot of their monument on Culp's Hill. So here's a newspaper article from Narragansett Times talking about these men being sent down to Gettysburg to set up some monuments. So it's pretty interesting. It seems to me to say that Joe Thompson might have been responsible for erecting that monument and not professional monument setter James Roach. Who knows? There's another piece to the mystery, though. This is a recent discovery in the Onondaga Historical Society, and this is actually kind of a newsletter that was taken to Gettysburg by Brevet Lieutenant George Sager of the 149th New York, who made these sketches on the back of this newsletter. And it seems to me that the top left here, definitely this looks like he's saying this is the monument that we got, and on the bottom left, this is the monument that we ordered. So if that's true, we're missing an entire piece right in the middle of the monument. That would have increased the size of the monument by a third. So that would certainly speak to the monument being shorter than they had intended. So with the missing base, the monument is shorter, like I said, by 1'9". And my argument about this, why the veterans had rejected this thing so violently, is because they compared it to monuments to its left and right, and they were furious with their stubby little monument. To their immediate left, the 78th, 102nd New York, this is just not a fair comparison. The one on the left, as I said, had 2 regiments, and they pooled their money. So this was $3,000. It's like, what is that, $80,000 in 2020 money to build that monument. So the one to its immediate right, though, looming here, towering over the 149th monument, cost the same amount of money. And that monument, to add insult to injury, belongs to none other than the 149th Sister Regiment, the 122nd New York, the 3rd Onondaga Regiment that joined joined the 149th New York in the trenches at the actual Battle of Gettysburg. So these are friends, relatives, neighbors with the 149th. So to the average visitor, it looks like, this behemoth represents a much more important unit in the Battle of Gettysburg, when in fact the opposite is completely true. The 149th fought all night on the 2nd, all day on the 3rd, and the 122nd kind of showed up at the 11th hour as a reinforcement. But you could see why the vets were upset by this, right? This monument to the 122nd New York is 5 feet taller than the 149th for the same money. So now, when I gave this talk 2 years ago about the 149th New York, I said that the 122nd New York's monument was 11 foot 3 inches tall. And I'd like to correct the record if I could. It's actually 12 foot 9. So the official height listing for the 122nd is wrong. 5 feet is a much bigger difference than 3 feet, which I said was the original difference between the 149th and the 122nd. How do I know this, you ask? Well, Maggie and I went down to Gettysburg and measured the thing. And I can tell you beyond the shadow of a doubt that the 122nd monument is 12 foot 9 inches tall. Here's a modern view of both of these monuments. The one on the left to the 149th New York was created by Francis and Company of Syracuse, New York. And I don't want to say rededicated, but the new monument was dedicated in 1892. Francis and Company is the same fabricator that made the 122nd's monument on the right. So to this day, nobody knows exactly what happened to the original monument, but we're getting close, so stay tuned. 2 years ago when I gave this talk, somebody asked me if any other monuments had mistakes or had to be corrected. And the answer to that question is yes. There was one other monument that had a defect and needed to be, the whole thing wasn't replaced, but a piece of it was replaced. And interestingly, both of these monuments are on the same order book page, the 149th and the 140th New York. So interesting. Both of which were sold by William Van Amridge, of course. So That brings us back to Greene. I just wanted to kind of close this out and talk about, this unsung hero of Gettysburg. Modern scholars agree that Greene and his men demonstrated uncanny valor and courage on the night of July 2nd, 1863. Greene's men held Culp's Hill in the face of overwhelming odds against an enemy in a night battle and seemingly surrounded by enemy troops. Modern scholars also agree that the breastworks created by Greene and his men saved the right flank of the Union Army that night. But Greene and his men weren't given any credit for it. Greene and his actions weren't even mentioned in Meade's official report. And actually, it took Corps Commander Slocum's kind of objection and saying, "Hey, you got to give my guys credit for this stubborn defense at Culp's Hill." Shortly after Gettysburg, on October 19th, 1863, General Greene is severely wounded in the face, leading his New York Brigade at the Battle of Wauhatchie Junction, Tennessee. He would suffer from this wound for the rest of his life. From the surgeon's pension report, we know that the bullet carried away some teeth and part of his jaw. And afterward, he would have trouble chewing and swallowing food for the rest of his life. In 1865, after mostly recovering from his wound, Greene served on Major General Slocum's staff, and in March of 65, he assumed command of the 3rd Brigade, 3rd Division, 14th Corps. And he'd have command of this brigade throughout the end of the war and marched with them in the Grand Review in Washington, D.C. Throughout the war, Greene proved himself to be a frontline general. He had 2 horses shot out from him, and he was wounded twice in battle, once at Wauhatchie Junction and once at Culp's Hill in Gettysburg. He had a chest contusion from a spent ball. After the war, he returned to life as a civil engineer, and in the 1870s, he oversaw a myriad of civil engineering projects in New York, D.C., and Detroit, and designed the sewage system here in Providence, Rhode Island. 1871, he became the chief engineer of the Croton Aqueduct Department of New York City, which is, redoing kind of the reservoir system. And he's also the chief engineer of public works in Washington, D.C. 1877, he became the president of the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is an organization he helped to found in 1852. He was the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society in 76 and 1877. Greene was a lifelong avid genealogist, and his research was published posthumously by his son, Francis Vinton Greene, as the Greenes of Rhode Island. And actually, how we know that he was related to Nathaniel Greene is from George Sears Greene's own research. In 1893, in this photograph, he attended the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and he was the Grand Marshal of the parade on New York Day, which is July 2nd, 1893. He's 92 years old in this photo, and he still fits into his uniform, which is probably the result of this wound in his face that never actually healed. He doesn't eat very much, and therefore he's still pretty thin. In 1894, by an act of Congress, Greene is added to the retired list of the United States Army and awarded an Army pension. Greene passed away at 97 years old at his daughter Anna's house in New Jersey. His funeral was held in Morristown, and he was laid to rest in the family graveyard in Apponaug, Rhode Island. In his will, he divided his library among his children and left his papers to the Rhode Island Historical Society, where they still are to this day. In the summer of 1899, that should be 1898. George's youngest son, who's now Brigadier General Francis Vinton Greene, hero of the Battle of Manila Bay in the Spanish-American War, petitions the Secretary of War to remove a boulder from Culp's Hill to serve as his father's headstone here in Rhode Island. The permission was granted, and the boulder is removed from the Gettysburg battlefield arrives in Apponaug by rail July 20th, 1898. I'm sorry, that's 1899. Shortly thereafter, a bronze memorial plaque was affixed to the front of the boulder, and a bronze cast sword was mounted to the top of this. Both of these items were stolen in the 1950s, but were recovered, and they're now housed in Warwick City Hall. So here we have the memorial plaque, talking about Greene's life and accomplishments. And on the bottom here, we have the bronze sword that was mounted to the top of the boulder. If you look right in the middle of the photograph on the left-hand side of the boulder, you could see, like a screw sticking up out. That's actually the mount for the sword. In 2001, the grave was rededicated with a replacement plaque made by the Gettysburg Monument Company in Warwick, Rhode Island. Now, sometime not too long ago, a local legend sprang up that said that this sword that was mounted on top of the boulder was Greene's actual battle sword. The Warwick Beacon called it his battle saber that they had mounted to the boulder. So I've spent the last couple of years investigating this, and it turns out this is actually a bronze cast of an actual sword. So part of that is true. It's a cast of a sword, but the jury is still out on whether or not Greene owned a sword like this. This particular pattern was produced, we think, by Tiffany and Company during the war in New York. But like I said, jury is out on whether Greene owned a sword in this pattern or whether he carried it in battle. Those two qualifiers, right? His battle saber. So we don't really know. We know it's a cast of a sword, but in any event. This is a view of the cemetery in 1900 or thereabouts. Although I don't know that to be true. This date is kind of fuzzy on this. In any event, another local legend sprang up in about the early 1990s that said that this specific boulder taken from Culp's Hill was chosen because Greene stood on top of it to command troops during the Battle of Gettysburg. From what I can gather, no one actually saw Greene standing on a rock, let alone this specific rock, during the battle. And not to even mention the wisdom of a brigade commander, a West Point graduate, standing on top of a rock in the middle of a night battle directing troops. We won't even touch that. But the one guy that actually reported coming into contact with Greene on the night of July 2nd is Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin. And Dawes says unequivocally, Dawes says that Greene was on a horse, not on a rock. Guy was on a horse. So I think part of that legend comes from Greene's monument on the summit of Culp's Hill, which if you've ever been to Culp's Hill, is littered with these gigantic boulders. And, it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to move Greene from his pedestal and in your mind's eye, put him on top of one of these giant boulders and put it together. Oh, he's got a boulder on his grave. He must have been standing on that rock during the Battle of Gettysburg. So the question remains, though, where exactly did this boulder come from on Culp's Hill? This painting by Edwin Forbes that I showed earlier shows exactly what the Confederate troops were facing the morning of July 3rd, 1863. So this rock right low center has become known as Forbes Rock. And it's a well-known landmark at Gettysburg. It was used by Confederate sharpshooters for cover during the battle. And this is a view of that same rock, which is taken by Matthew Brady a couple of days after the battle. The theory is that this rock lower right, not the one right in the middle with Brady seated in front of it, but if you look down off to the right here, that rock is no longer there. It's no longer in Gettysburg. So the theory is that that might be the rock that was taken to Apponaug and placed on Greene's grave. In any event, the city of Warwick has just put about $250,000 into restoring and renovating the Green Cemetery in Apponaug, which was for years a haven of villains and ne'er-do-wells and vagrants, littered with beer bottles and trash the first time I was up there a couple of years ago. But now it's beautiful. We have these paved walkways and beautiful granite stairs, and it's gorgeous up there. So thank you very much to the city of Warwick for all your hard work. I wanted to take some pictures of the cemetery for you, but unfortunately I didn't have time to make it up there. So here's a shot of the excavators working on the stairs from the parking lot. But for those of you that have been there, yay, we have a parking lot now. And we don't have to park at the Fraternal Order of Police, which is awkward. So in any event, I hear it's beautiful up there. I can't wait to get back. Now, in closing, I just would like to maybe ask a favor. If anyone out there knows anything about Robert D. Barr, Joseph Bedford, James Roach, William Van Amringe, or sure, George Sears Greene, can you reach out and have a conversation about it, because we are really trying to put together their stories and learn more about what they did in terms of, well, just in general, what they did, but specifically as it pertains to Westerly Granite and monuments at Gettysburg. So thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me and hear me blather on about esoteric granite in faraway Pennsylvania, but this is a subject that I really enjoy, and I was so excited to be able to share it with you. So thanks.